Hi everyone, I'm Anna Kachikian from the Armenian Report, and today I bring you an in-depth exclusive interview with Jared Genser, the international human rights lawyer representing Ruben Vardanyan. As many of you know, Ruben Vardanyan was taken hostage by Azerbaijani regime alongside other Artsakh officials and prisoners of war. He has been unjustly imprisoned in Baku for 15 months and counting. In this interview, Genser shares breaking news with us, news that could significantly shift the current situation. He explains why Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev must think twice now that Donald Trump is president. Genser tells us that the Trump administration is expected to take a firm stance, emphasizing that they won't mess around. He warns Aliyev that his actions won't go unchecked under this new administration. Genser also reveals that he and his team have already begun discussions with key officials in Washington. He shares his belief that the U.S. will soon adopt policies that will increase pressure on Aliyev to change course, especially regarding the treatment of Artsakh's people and its leaders. This interview is sponsored by KJT Law Group. If you or a loved one was impacted by the recent Eaton fire, please visit PasadenaFires.com or call 818-507-8525. Thank you, Jared, so much for joining me today. This is a very important interview for me. It's one of the, actually, I was telling my friends that this is one of the biggest interviews because I feel like such immense pressure. Ruben Vardanyan has given so much to Armenia and Artsakh and to Armenians globally, and to see him in this situation and you representing him as his international human rights attorney, this is a very big deal for me personally as an Armenian and as a human being. So can you summarize Ruben Vardanyan's legal situation and the charges he's facing in Azerbaijan?
Well, let me begin by just saying that it's a big deal for me too. Ruben Vardanyan is a hero to me personally, has done such extraordinary work in Armenia and Artsakh and beyond to try to simply stand up for the rights of the people of Artsakh and to ensure the right to self-determination. And he's, not just a philanthropist and a political leader, but a human rights defender. And for no fault of his own, and simply by standing up to President Aliyev and the Azeri regime, he has found himself not only in harm's way, but at grave risk of being convicted and sentenced to even life in prison for a bunch of manufactured charges that he never committed. So if I were to describe his current situation, the government of Azerbaijan has thrown a whole series of charges. At latest count, 44 different charges against him, not just against him, but of other former leaders of Artsakh, including 3 former presidents, a former foreign minister, a former president of the National Assembly, and so forth. All of these are former civilian leaders of Artsakh who are political prisoners of Baku and of President Aliyev. And they have, in essence, been charged with simply doing their jobs as leaders of the Artsakh region of Azerbaijan. For this, they're facing charges like financing of terrorism and money laundering and separatism and a bunch of charges that, I've seen in many cases where I've represented political leaders over the years that are, trumped up charges designed to provide a pretext for, in essence, punishing Ruben and the others for simply exercising the rights to freedom of opinion and expression, their right to political participation, and their right to advocating for the self-determination of the people of Artsakh. So it's a very, very serious situation. Ruben and the others could face up to life in prison, and we're obviously very, very worried that that's the current trajectory of the case.
Can you talk about some of the tortures that Ruben Vardanyan and the others are facing and behind bars in Baku?
So, right now I would say that Ruben's situation is stable. He did have an especially difficult time last year when he undertook a 2-week hunger strike to protest what he and the others were going through. He was put into an isolation cell. He was denied even water and food, kept in a cell that was with the lights on 24 hours a day, given no reading materials, and so subjected to both physical and psychological torture. Over that time, he was also denied access not only to his family but to his own counsel as well. So the situation was pretty dire then. He had a number of health impacts, obviously coming from how he was treated. I'll say that thankfully that physical and psychological torture has retreated, but that doesn't mean that things are really all that much better. The reality is he's been detained for almost 1.5 years on bogus charges. He's been subjected to extended and illegal pretrial detention, flagrant violations of his presumption of innocence, and he's being put on trial in a military tribunal, even though he's a civilian and never served in the military in his life. The due process guarantees and military trials in Azerbaijan are even less than those in civilian trials. And it's worth noting, that it isn't just Ruben and the other former leaders of Artsakh that are political prisoners, but there are more than 300 Azeri political prisoners being detained by Aliyev in Azerbaijan, for simply standing up to his regime there, and opposing, for example, his recent run for the presidency, and where he stole the election and so forth. So it isn't just the people of Armenia and those of Artsakh who have legitimate and serious grievances against Aliyev for ethnic cleansing of the Artsakh region, and the imprisonment of the region's former leaders as political prisoners. But the people of Azerbaijan recognize that Aliyev is a dictator and a thug, and this is why Aliyev has to imprison so many of his own people too.
So on January 17th, there was a trial. There was 15 of the people being tried, 16th of whom is Ruben Vardanyan. They separated his case, handed him a 400-page document in Azerbaijani, and you couldn't read that in minutes in a different language. Ruben Vardanyan couldn't do that either, but they granted you until January 27th, so this coming Monday, to get familiar with this document. Have you seen it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the irony here is that, they kept postponing the trial for 1.5 years, and now, all of a sudden they want to move expeditiously through this process. The reality is that that large parts of the indictment and the so-called evidence are classified as state secrets under Azeri law. And so while our local lawyer has been able to review them, he can't even share certain information with Ruben or with us, which obviously makes it impossible to defend oneself in these circumstances. Ruben shouldn't be before a military tribunal. He's been denied his right to access to counsel as well. I asked to be able to go visit him and to provide him advice under international law, and was denied the ability to come to Azerbaijan myself as well. This is a kangaroo court. This is a political show trial, right? Nobody should be under any illusion that this is a legitimate process in any way whatsoever. The outcome is predetermined. The fact that he's convicted is predetermined. The only question is how lengthy a sentence will he get? But right now, I think Aliyev is going to have to think twice about what he's doing. Obviously, President Trump was just inaugurated as the new president of the United States. And, even before that happened a few months back, as many in Armenia saw, as well as former residents of Artsakh, he spoke out publicly on social media, condemning the ethnic cleansing of the region and saying that he'll stand up for the Armenian Christian political prisoners of Artsakh as well. And this is going to, I hope and believe, force Aliyev to rethink his position, not just on the political prisoners of Artsakh being held in Azerbaijan, but on a wide array of different issues. I can say from experience, having worked with, both, the incoming and now Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the new National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, that these are people who don't suffer fools gladly, is the expression we'd use in the United States. They're going to take a tough and firm position relative to Aliyev, and they're not going to mess around. So I do think that if Aliyev thinks that he's going to just somehow do whatever he wants with no consequence, he's going to find something quite different happening out of Washington. And we've already begun talking to new Trump administration officials about the current situation and what's happening, not just with respect to the political prisoners in Ruben's case, but the broader situation, obviously, of the ethnic cleansing and the dismantling of the governmental institutions of Artsakh. And so, I think that, as is the case with all political prisoners, they're being held for reasons other than the so-called charges against them. They're in essence being held in this case as hostages to negotiate with Washington and other powers around the world. And so my view is that we're going to see a very different set of policies coming out of Washington that will put a lot of pressure on Aliyev to change course. Dictators never release political prisoners when they want to. They only do it when they have to, and they have to when they realize that releasing the prisoners is the best of a bunch of bad choices that they have. And I think that Aliyev is going to find quite quickly that that the Trump administration, the president, the Secretary of State, and others are not going to stand by and allow this mistreatment of the people of Artsakh and of their former leaders to continue without cause or consequence.
This is the bombshell that I did not expect you to drop during this interview, but because yesterday was an inauguration, and the response from Armenia was that Trump administration is not good for Armenia. He already stopped foreign aid to for 90 days to foreign countries, and that he's best buds with Erdogan, and that Trump is not gonna and so you're kind of saying the opposite of the response that the people of Armenia had towards Trump, and so I thought that was very telling.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth noting that I'm not speaking to what the relationship might be between the Trump administration and Prime Minister Pashinyan and the government of Armenia. That's a separate question. But the bigger question, because of the very strong Armenian American diaspora, as you well know, is how will the president deal with Aliyev, and how will he deal with the issues relating to Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh, and the political prisoners as well. And I think it's already clear from his prior social media post and from a number of very positive conversations I've already been having with incoming and now current Trump administration officials, that they're going to take a tough line on these issues and on the persecution of Armenian Christians as a generalized matter going forward. So I can't speak to, what Prime Minister Pashinyan's views might be about, whether the Trump administration may be good or bad for Armenia. But I am very confident, based on, my own past experience working with a lot of these new Trump administration officials over, my 20-year career in Washington as a human rights lawyer, that these are people who care deeply about human rights, that they care deeply about the plight of persecuted Christians, and they were not impressed with, based on the preliminary conversations I've been having, with the discussions over what this deal might look like between Azerbaijan and Armenia, because, among other things, that draft deal, I don't know what draft it's in, maybe it's dozens draft, makes no mention at all of Artsakh or the people of Artsakh, or justice and accountability for the victims of the ethnic cleansing, or the ability of people to return there, or compensation for those who, or for some or all of them that might not be able to return there, or even that an agreement would lead to the release of the Armenian Christian political prisoners being held by Aliyev. And these are issues that the president cares about. To be clear, I don't speak for the president. I'm just simply an American citizen who's a human rights lawyer based in Washington. But having worked with many of his most senior officials in the field of foreign policy, I do think that these issues are going to be a priority for the administration. Obviously, there's a lot going on with the new government having come into place, and lots of very high-profile foreign policy challenges, whether it be Ukraine or the war in Gaza, now ceasefire and so forth. But I do think we already have the ear of very important people at the White House and at the State Department. We have strong support on a bipartisan basis from members of Congress, and my view would be that if Pashinyan were smart, he'd align himself with the forces in the Trump administration that would like to see these issues getting addressed, rather than standing in the way or suggesting that somehow there should be other priorities. These are issues that are values questions for the president's new team when it comes to the persecution of Christians in the world, and the sooner he understands and appreciates that and agrees with the Trump administration that these issues need to be addressed, I think the better relationship he'll have with Washington.
Towards the end, I was going to actually ask you, what can the Armenian government do to help bring our POWs back? And I guess you answered that question. You touched on that, but I guess my question now is that, have you spoken to Pashinyan? Has he reached out to the attorneys representing the POWs so that the government can work together to bring our POWs back?
So, I've been in touch with Armenian government officials. I'm going to have to leave it at that, but I haven't been in touch with Pashinyan himself, nor have I heard from Pashinyan himself. We obviously have seen the public comments that he's made about Ruben and about the others. It doesn't seem, from what I've heard, that bring Ruben or the others home is an especially high priority. That's obviously frustrating and disappointing, would be a kind way to put it, because Ruben and the others are simply Armenian citizens and nothing else, and it's the job of a government to help their foreign, their citizens abroad or in foreign countries when they are in harm's way. And in this particular case, when you look at, especially the political prisoners, but also the POWs, there's no one but the government of Armenia to actually stand up for them and to assist them. So, while we are engaging in self-help, obviously, I've been asked by Ruben and his family not just to advocate for him, but to advocate for all the political prisoners and the POWs. Everywhere we go, and we're asking for help from many different people. And a lot of people are asking, well, what's the position of the Armenian government on this? And, and our response is, you should go and ask them, because, the reality is that it should be the Armenian government that's asking governments around the world to secure the release of the political prisoners and of the POWs. And it doesn't seem to be an especially high priority for them. So, I think, we are going to continue to make our views known and, push, Aliyev in from every direction we possibly can, and enlist support in Washington, which is where I'm based. And, I've already experienced strong support from the incoming administration in terms of how responsive they've been to the outreach that we've been undertaking, and expressing their concerns that are consistent with those that have been previously expressed publicly by by Donald Trump before he was inaugurated. And so I do think we'll have a lot of strong support coming from Washington. And as I said, if Yerevan wants to have a strong relationship with Washington, one of the smartest things that they could do is to sit down with the incoming government that's just taken over, and understand Washington's concerns about Azerbaijan, about Armenia, about the region, and what are specific thematic areas of concern. And as I said, persecuted Christians is going to be a very high priority for this administration. So I think that that's all for the good for the political prisoners and the POWs.
What do you think is the motivation for Vardanyan's arrest, all these charges against him? What is the motivation?
Well, I think, that's probably a question best posed to the government of Azerbaijan. I can only, of course, speculate on that. What I would say is that, it's quite clear that as state councilor in Artsakh, he was an outspoken advocate for the self-determination of the people of Artsakh to determine their own future, their form of government they want to have, and to live their lives, with as much peace and prosperity as possible, where they had lived for generations. And so, This obviously is diametrically opposed to, Aliyev's view of the world and his belief that Artsakh, was, and will always be a part of Azerbaijan, and that there is, that the people of Artsakh have no rights, history, or culture in the region, which obviously is ahistorical. And because Ruben was such an effective and an outspoken critic of Aliyev and his regime, he obviously was an enormous obstacle to Aliyev advancing his own narrative and reclaiming the region. And so ultimately, Ruben was an enormous obstacle to Aliyev, in achieving something that was of enormous importance to him, which was to, displace the Armenian population of Artsakh, through an ethnic cleansing, and dismantle the state government, and to decapitate the leadership of the country by grabbing as many of the former leaders as possible, not just those that are currently detained, but the prosecutor general of Azerbaijan at the time, also said that he'd opened up 300 other cases against different former officials of the region as well. All of this is just about ultimately the execution of a very, very well thought out, long planned, and long discussed ethnic cleansing of the entire region, so that Aliyev could move Azeris to retake the territory, and destroy all semblance of Armenian religious and cultural history in Artsakh, and declare a victory over a group of people that he believed were usurpers in his country.
Now, you're an international human rights attorney. The average person, Jared, cannot process how someone like Ruben Vardanyan, with so much wealth, power, he had so many famous friends, could find himself behind bars. How does that work? Why isn't the international community reacting? Why isn't there more, bold reaction? Like, why is everyone just kind of silent, going about their life? Like, I understand this is more of a psychological question for you, but like, you've gone through this with so many other clients. Yeah. Like, how does this work?
Look, I mean, I've represented and represent some of the most famous political prisoners in the world, and many of them have been famous or wealthy. Most of them have not been, by the way. I mean, I mostly represent political prisoners that no one has heard of. But I've also represented some of the most prominent. I mean, I represented China's Liu Xiaobo, the Nobel Peace Laureate, in China. One of my other current clients is Imran Khan, the famous cricketer and then Prime Minister of Pakistan, who was, taken out by the military there and is a political prisoner now in Pakistan, and is probably the best known person in the entire country and should be the prime minister again, but for the stolen elections of the Pakistani regime. So unfortunately, this happens all the time. Entrenched interests, that oppose the forces of democracy, freedom, and human rights, find a way to exercise, their power, and to inflict fear on anyone that would stand in their way. And obviously, the more outspoken the critics are of such regimes, the bigger a target that they become. And as a result, it's not uncommon for these kinds of people, including Ruben, to be grabbed as hostages, in essence. Because somebody like Ruben, with his outspoken voice and resources, has been uniquely capable of standing up for the rights of the people of Artsakh in ways that few others were capable of doing. And so that obviously made him, for Aliyev, public enemy number one, and a person well worth grabbing. I think Ruben knew, obviously, when he traveled to Artsakh, settled there, that he was putting himself in harm's way, and he obviously knew that when he became the state counselor. And having seen firsthand and lived through firsthand what the people in Artsakh went through, it was hard not to have enormous empathy and sympathy for the challenges that they were facing, and to speak out against the injustice that these the people of Artsakh were facing on a over many decades at the hands of the Azeri regime. So I think that that's how you end up becoming a a political prisoner is when at a certain point in time, you're just simply not willing to stand by and say nothing and do nothing as an authoritarian regime tries to impose its will upon you. And, all clients I've ever represented who became political prisoners, get to a certain point in time where they, cross the Rubicon and, and recognize that their activities could well put them in harm's way. And in Ruben's case, I can't imagine he was surprised by the fact that he became a political prisoner. As to why more people aren't doing more to get him out, obviously there are a lot of people working to get him out around the world. I think the biggest challenge we have is that we have a lot of enormous crises, foreign policy crises in the world today, whether it be, the fall of Assad in Syria or Gaza or Ukraine, or any one of a number of different sets of atrocity crimes that are being committed around the world in Sudan and South Sudan and, in Venezuela and Nicaragua. There are so many different places around the world, China, North Korea, that one could look to. And so, the challenge is that that the caucuses are not central focus right now in terms of what's happening. There was obviously a much greater focus when the ethnic cleansing was underway, and where 120,000 people were driven out of their homes and across the border into Armenia. But at this point, tragically, the fact that Aliyev imprisons 300 Azeris and a few dozen Armenian Christian political prisoners and POWs is not the kind of thing that attracts an enormous amount of attention from the world. That said, the injustice is palpable, and as a human rights lawyer, I rely very much on the mistakes that dictators make. And I don't know who Aliyev thinks he's fooling when he has acted in the way that he has, going after, all of these Armenian Christian political prisoners and POWs, putting them before military tribunals, having secret evidence, denying, a fair and open trial, denying access to counsel, time to prepare the defense, access to the evidence, right? This is not going to fool anybody. It's designed, I call it a political show trial because it's really political theater and not an actual trial. Because at the end of the day, even if all the things I just described were not major due process abuses in the case, the bottom line is that the judiciary in Azerbaijan is not independent and impartial, and the military tribunal reports to up the military chain of command, and the commander-in-chief, of course, is Aliyev himself. So we already know what the outcome is going to be. And one of the things that I would say is that the way that Aliyev has handled this case throughout, and the way that he's handling this trial, is only going to help us enormously attract more attention onto what's going on in Azerbaijan, especially because I believe that Ruben and the others are going to be rapidly tried, convicted, and sentenced to lengthy prison terms, if not life in prison, and that will draw enormous additional attention onto the situation, and I think help us attract the kind of support that we need from the U.S. and beyond in order to ultimately secure the release of Ruben and the others.
As I said earlier, there's 7 million Armenians in the diaspora globally, and this is a very sensitive, touchy subject for us because we want to see our POWs come back.
Of course.
What do you think 7 million Armenians can collectively do to help get our POWs back?
Well, I think many of my Armenian American friends and Armenian British friends and so many others are doing exactly what needs to be done, which is everyone needs to be politically active. I understand that there's often a sense of a sense of helplessness and a feeling like the problems are just so enormous and it's just so hard to get anybody to pay attention and care, and no one's going to listen, and no one has been listening in the way that it's needed, and so forth. But I can be only so effective as a human rights lawyer if I didn't have, Ruben's family working with me, speaking in their own voice about what they're going through and what they're suffering through. We wouldn't really move people to action, right? So I think that the personal connection that so many Armenians in the diaspora have to, to the situation in Artsakh, to the political prisoners and the POWs that are Armenian in Azerbaijan, right? all of them need to use their voice in every possible way they can in whatever country they're in, reaching out to their governments, their national governments, or their representatives and national legislatures, writing op-eds in newspapers, talking to their neighbors, talking to human rights groups, right, asking for help. I mean, there's nothing wrong with asking for help. And I think that, to me, it's such an extraordinary travesty of justice that when the world has repeatedly said never again, never again after the Armenian genocide, right? And then you had, the Holocaust and so many atrocities that have been committed around the world. The fact that, especially after what happened with the Armenian genocide, to have the world stand by and say nothing and do nothing with respect to the ethnic cleansing of the Armenian population of Artsakh, and they're being all pushed out into Armenia, shocks the conscience. And, I think we all need to speak publicly and loudly, not just those in the Armenian diaspora, but all human beings. We're all interconnected despite all of our differences, our different races, religions, ethnicities, creeds, you name it, right? We're all human. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights says quite clearly that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and in rights, right? And it doesn't matter if you are a person who was pushed out in ethnic cleansing from Artsakh, or if you're someone who's South Sudanese who's being murdered because of your tribe, or your Venezuelan political dissident who's been imprisoned because of standing up to the regime, right? We're all human, right? And we all want to be free and to live our lives with our families, and to do the best that we can, for ourselves, our communities, and our country. And so I think that we all have to stand in solidarity with each other. I think that communities that are suffering, enormous persecution, not only need to come together themselves to ask for help and support from the international community, but can also work in common cause with others facing similar kinds of persecution around the world. So I think my most important message is to have hope. People are listening. People all do understand what's happening, and ultimately will prevail. We just have to keep fighting. We can't give up. We can't give in to hopelessness. We have to, both pray and act. Pray to God for help and support, which clearly, the Armenian political prisoners and POWs desperately need, but also act, and to work collaboratively and collectively to ensure that the plight of these people and the situation of the people of Artsakh, stays on the international agenda until we achieve justice and accountability and the release of all of these hostages being held in Azerbaijan.
Thank you. Final question.
Sure.
What do you think is the future of Mr. Vardanyan, and what are you expecting from this January 27 trial hearing, hearing that's coming up?
I'm expecting more of the same. The reality is that all these people are being put on trial through these military tribunals, and I expect them all to be convicted and given lengthy prison terms. But that isn't the end of the fight. That's actually just the beginning of the fight. So, or the end of the beginning, as one might say. I would note that I've represented over the course of my career more than 350 political prisoners, and on average, when I look at those that I've freed, they serve 11 and a half years less time in prison than to which they were sentenced, and that's because they're often given lengthy prison terms that then sparks global outrage and enormous pressure and escalated pressure on the governments and the regimes that detain them, about the dumbest thing that a dictator can do is to take a person like Ruben and the other political leaders and make them into martyrs for the international community. That will just draw so much more attention and focus on Aliyev. The reality is that if Aliyev is as he thinks he is, a really smart guy, beloved by his people, a leader in the region and the world, right, then he would show how smart he was by just, releasing all of these people immediately and unconditionally. Because why do you need to be afraid of being criticized by Ruben Vardanyan or any of these other people? Or why do you care if you're so beloved, why do you have to imprison 300 of your own people as political prisoners? And the reason is because dictators rule by fear. That's what they imposed on their own people and their neighboring countries in order to maintain their grip on power. But they're also living in their own fear every day, right? They're in fear of loss of power, of justice and accountability coming to them, of their children and their families being targeted with, financial sanctions and travel bans, right? These are all things that dictators worry about every single day. And so, Aliyev is not sitting where he is and feeling like he's won. He's sitting where he is and is wondering who's coming for him next. And I think that we in the international community, through obviously nonviolent and legal means, need to do everything possible to put as much pressure as possible on Aliyev, so that everywhere he goes, he hears about the people of Artsakh, about the political prisoners and the POWs, and everywhere he goes, he has leaders telling him, "Why are you doing this? Right? You need to let them go. You need to let them go now." Immediately and unconditionally.
Thank you for watching. Thank you, Jared Genser, for your time. And thanks to KJT Law Group for sponsoring this interview. Stay safe, everyone.